Hello, good morning, and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. A happy and prosperous new year to all of you. May all your legitimate dreams come true. This year, we have planned a host of new initiatives for the aspirants to excel in the Civil Services Examination. Beginning today, we will have the daily newspaper analysis live every morning at 10 o'clock. And once the live session is over, jump to our official Telegram channel for the daily quiz based on the topics that we will cover each day in the Hindu newspaper analysis. The link to join our official Telegram channel is provided in the video description. Not just this, we have a host of new initiatives. For example, coming Friday, 7:30 p.m., we will have an Ask Us Anything session. 4 teachers of BYJU'S IAS will conduct a live session taking your questions, your preparation doubts, your queries, and we will resolve them live. Next Saturday, that means next week, we will have Polity This Week. Based on the popular demand, all the important polity-based current affairs will be discussed live every Saturday at 8 p.m. And I will also be taking up your questions so that your preparation is on the track. If you're liking these new initiatives, press the like button, comment, drop in your comments, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and share the links of these classes with your friends and fellow aspirants. And we are also coming up with a host of new initiatives specifically, exclusively for our subscribers. So subscribe to our channel now, and let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, and these are the topics that we shall be covering today. Let's get started and look at Editorial 1 from today's Delhi edition of The Hindu, A's and Nays. Now let's try and understand this editorial in great detail. Voting is an important duty. Although voting is not a fundamental duty mentioned under the Constitution, mentioned under Part 4, capital A of the Constitution, but nevertheless, voting is an important duty. But there have been some developments in the past few decades which have led to something known as de facto disenfranchisement. What does that mean? Migrants, for example, you're born and brought up in Bihar, but then you migrate, let's say for marriage or for livelihood opportunities, to Karnataka or Maharashtra or Gujarat. Although the law does not debar you from voting, but it becomes very difficult for these migrants to travel from their place of work back to their village, back to their original state, and to cast vote. Which basically means we are disenfranchising a large proportion of our population. They are simply unable to cast their vote, which is their constitutional right. Migrants, for example, according to 2011 census, we have 450 million migrants in India, which corresponds to 37% of our population. But we are not talking about just these migrants. Now listen to me carefully. There are 2 broad set of migrants. For example, you were born in Bihar, but then you travel to Karnataka for livelihood opportunities. Then you're residing in Karnataka for a long period of time. You become the domicile of Karnataka. You register as a voter in Karnataka, so you're voting in Karnataka. So we are not only talking about these migrants who migrate to other parts of the country, and at the same time they are eligible to vote in the new cities, in the new state. We are talking about also short-term migrants, or what we call seasonal migrants. Let's say there are migrants from Odisha, Bihar, UP who travel to Punjab, for example, during the harvesting season for a particular season. And at that time, when they are indulging in harvesting season, there is election in their respective state. They cannot go back to their respective state and cast vote, exercise franchise. participate in the biggest festival of India's democracy. So these seasonal migrants, we don't have a data, unfortunately. A study was conducted by Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which says that there are about 250 million seasonal migrants in India, and they are unable to cast their vote. And majority of these seasonal migrants, they belong to Adivasis, they belong to Dalits, they belong to extremely backward classes of our society. Now a proposal has been brought up by the Election Commission of India, where Election Commission of India is providing for a remote voting or remote electronic voting machine. So we have electronic voting machines which are manufactured by two public sector undertakings in India. One is Bharat Electronics Limited, the other is Electronics Corporation of India. One is based out of Bengaluru, the other is based out of Hyderabad. It is these two public sector undertakings which manufacture electronic voting machines, which are under the control of Election Commission of India. Now these two public sector undertakings, they have also developed a prototype of remote EVM. And what is this remote EVM? There will be an all-party meeting, or in a sense, Election Commission of India has asked all the political parties to come on the January 16 to discuss this proposal and have some sort of written report, some written advice, some written collaboration from the political parties as to how do we implement this remote EVM or how do we implement remote voting. For example, you are from Bihar, but now you are working in Karnataka. You don't want to go back to Bihar to cast your vote. What you can do, let's say there are migrants from Bihar and they are working in Karnataka. But these voters from Bihar, they may pertain to constituency X, Y or Z. Now what these voters will do, they will approach the returning officer of their constituency, give their details, and once the returning officer certifies that yes, you are a registered voter in this constituency, then Election Commission of India will ensure that they will vote in Karnataka for Bihar Lok Sabha constituencies or Bihar Assembly elections, and they will vote on an electronic voting machine which will have provision for up to 72 constituencies. What are we talking about? We are talking about giving opportunity to every single Indian to cast his or her vote. Now the problem is that there are millions of migrants in India, particularly the seasonal migrants who for a particular season migrate from their place of residence to other parts of the country for livelihood opportunities, and then they are unable to cast their vote. And that is what I refer to as de facto disenfranchisement. That means although law does not bar them from voting, but the situation is such because of the migration that they are unable to exercise their right to vote. Now for this, Election Commission of India has asked the two public sector undertakings to develop another variety, another prototype of an electronic voting machine, which is a remote EVM. So these migrants will vote in their own places where they are working, but they can cater to up to 72 constituencies. So they will go, enter the polling booth, there will be a remote EVM where they can select up to 72 constituencies. And I have to choose which constituency I am a registered voter for, and I will vote for the candidates who are contesting from that constituency. Now there are some political parties which support this view. There are some political parties which oppose this view. And this is what this editorial also says, that there is no reason to oppose this noble idea of allowing migrants to vote. But what is the practice that you follow? What is the mechanism that you follow? What is the scope that you follow? On that, there should be a lot of debate. Let's look at this carefully. Tariq Thachal, a political scientist, in the year 2017 conducted a study. study of those who are working in Delhi as construction workers. Political scientist Tariq Thachil says only 1 in 5 construction workers has voted in the elections, which means majority of the people, 80% of these migrants, they have not cast their vote. In fact, there was another study, inclusive elections in India. This inclusive elections in India study was conducted by Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and this was supported by the Election Commission of India as well, sponsored by Election Commission of India as well. An overwhelming majority of these seasonal migrants, they have not been able to exercise their right to vote. So this is a noble idea to allow these migrants to vote and to participate in the biggest festival of India's democracy, which is the election. But now there are some concerns as well. Concern number 1, model code of conduct. Now listen to me carefully. For example, there are elections in Bihar, and there are migrants from Bihar who are working in Karnataka. Now these migrants in Karnataka, they have to vote in Karnataka, but for the Legislative Assembly of Bihar. Then model code of conduct, will it be imposed only in Bihar, or those where we have a significant presence of the Bihar migrants in Karnataka? So that is challenge number 1. Challenge number 2, it is going to be a challenge for regional political parties. Now what is the challenge for regional political parties? When these migrants who are, for example, working in Maharashtra, they have to vote, but for the elections to Bihar Legislative Assembly, in their mind, they will vote based upon the performance of the central government. So whether the central government has performed well or not, that will be the basis of their choice to determine which political party they want to vote for, which means they are detached from the local issues, domestic issues of Bihar, because they are migrants in Maharashtra. So on what basis will they vote in these elections? They will vote on the basis of national issues, not the local domestic issues. That's another problem, and that is why you will see that the regional political parties will oppose any move of having remote EVMs or remote voting for these migrants. There was another study which says 40% of the population, when it comes to metros such as Delhi, Kolkata, Bengaluru, Mumbai, Surat, more than 40% of the population of these cities is made up of migrants. So it is very important that we allow these migrants to vote. It's very important that we make it very easy for these migrants to participate in the election exercise, because they are equal citizens of this country. But at the same time, there are challenges. Challenges such as that in these elections, when we allow remote voting, national issues will dominate. The local issues will be relegated to the back burner. Second is the implementation of the model code of conduct. If there are majority or there is a significant population of migrants in Karnataka, but the election is to be conducted in Bihar, the model code of conduct, will it be imposed only in Bihar or those areas of Karnataka as well where we have a significant migrant population? That's another challenge. And that's perhaps why the Election Commission of India has asked the various political parties to come for a meeting on January 16 to give their suggestions as to how we can better implement this proposal. But in this editorial, there is one thing which is incorrect, and that is my duty to point it out. According to this editorial, with EVMs, the voter has no way to see whether the vote is recorded as it is cast. This is incorrect. Why? Because an electronic voting machine is also connected with VVPAT, Voter Verifiable Paper Audit Trail. So as soon as you press the button on the electronic voting machine, VVPAT will display the serial number of your vote, the name of the candidate you are voting for, as well as the symbol of the political party that you're voting for. And this information will be displayed for 6 seconds. After that, it will be cut and it will drop in the VVPAT box. So there is a way, there is transparency when it comes to the use of electronic voting machines. The voters will get to know whether their vote is indeed registered for the candidate of their choice or not. You may be also asked in your prelims examination, when was VVPAT used for the first time? It was used in 2013 in Noksen constituency of Nagaland. You may also be asked about when EVMs were used for the first time. EVMs were used for the first time in a by-election to Parur constituency in Kerala. So that is when electronic voting machine was used for the first time. And what is this editorial saying? Higher turnout is worth striving for, because 1 in every 3 voter is not voting in the Indian elections. Why? The principal reason is the migration. 1 in every 3 voter is not voting. So if we have to increase the voter participation, we have to allow these migrants to vote. We have to facilitate these migrants to vote. We have to make it easy for these migrants to vote. Although higher turnout is worth striving for, but not without sufficient safeguards, according to this editorial in today's The Hindu newspaper. That's all that you need to know regarding this editorial. Now let's jump to another beautiful column, India-China between pre-1962 and now. December 9, 2022, the troops of India and China clashed at the Tawang sector in Arunachal Pradesh. Was it unusual? No. Tawang sector, according to defense experts, every year we witness clashes between the 2 troops of India and China. We have witnessed clashes in October 2021, in 2018, 2016. But what was so significant in these recent clashes between India and China in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh is that this time it led to injuries. More injuries on the Chinese side than on the Indian side, but it led to fist fight, it led to physical injuries. That's what makes this Tawang clash something very serious. Tawang is considered to be the birthplace of the 6th Dalai Lama. In fact, the current Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, remained in Tawang for a few days, at a monastery in Tawang for a few days, when he was migrating from Tibet to India, because the Dalai Lama from Tibet has been given refuge in India. That is another point of friction between India and China. India's continued support for Tibet cause is also a point of friction between India and China. The 14th Dalai Lama in 1959, when he migrated from Tibet to India, he stayed at Tawang monastery for a few days and then came to India. But at the same time, it is argued that 15th Dalai Lama may be born in Tawang. And this Tawang was under illegal Chinese occupation for at least 2 months when 1962 war broke out between India and China. Now, what do you mean by the Dalai Lama, or Lamaism, for example? Can be important for your interview question as well. Lamaism is a form of Buddhism which is practiced in Tibet and Bhutan. And this is one form of the Mahayana Buddhism that is practiced. There are 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. One such school is Gelug. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual head of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, which is a form of Mahayana Buddhism practiced in Tibet and Bhutan. And this Tawang, or the entire Arunachal Pradesh, is claimed by China. China claims that entire Arunachal Pradesh is part of China. What is this column talking about? if you look at the history of India-China relationship, this is where, apart from this column, we will also discuss a beautiful article written by the former Foreign Secretary of India, Mr. Vijay Gokhale, who writes on the Carnegie website, is a fellow at the Carnegie India Foundation. He writes a beautiful piece regarding India-China relations. We will look at this specific article written by Mr. Sujan Shenoy, and at the same time, we will look at the beautiful article, the research paper written by Mr. Vijay Gokhale. Now, what is Mr. Shenoy talking about? He says that prior to 1962, there was a dispute between India and China on the territorial jurisdictions. For example, India was claiming, and India still claims, that Aksai Chin, which is under the illegal occupation of China, which is the part of the erstwhile Jammu and Kashmir, it is a legitimate territory of India. That is our claim, our genuine claim, that Aksai Chin in its entirety belongs to us. And China says, no, it belongs to us. There used to be a territory known as NIFA, Northeast Frontier Agency, which is today known as Arunachal Pradesh. China claims that the entire NIFA or Arunachal Pradesh is the territory of China. So prior to 1962, the dispute was on the territory that Aksai Chin, India claims is ours, NIFA or Arunachal Pradesh, China claims is theirs. But after 1962, now we are witnessing some transgressions, skirmishes along the line of actual control, because the border is not clearly demarcated between India and China. This is what led to the Galwan clashes in March, April, May in 2020, where more than 40 Chinese soldiers died or were killed in these clashes, and less than 20 Indian soldiers were martyred in these clashes between India and China in Galwan. So now what we are witnessing a deliberate attempt by China to alter the status quo. There are some territories which are under India's control, which we were patrolling. Now China is entering into these territories and violating the status quo. So previously, prior to 1962, the dispute was on jurisdictions, that this territory is ours, that territory is ours. Now we are witnessing the transgressions by China, and China is becoming hyper-expansionist in its ideology. And now let me tell you something about Mr. Vijay Gokhale's article, beautiful column, and listen to me carefully. According to Mr. Vijay Gokhale, we can divide India-China relationship into three phases. 1949 to 1962, 1962 to 1989, and then 1991 onwards. When the People's Republic China was established by Mao Zedong in 1949, at that time, China looked at India not bilaterally, in the sense, if you and me, we want to establish relations, how do we do that? I would keep in mind, what will you offer me? You will keep in mind, what will I offer you? So if there are some things which are mutually beneficial to both of us, we will establish relations. China was not establishing relations, or China was not looking at India through its bilateral prism, but was looking at India through the prism of United States, USSR, and China. That means India is to be looked at by not what India is going to offer us, but by looking at this triangle of United States, USSR, and China. Because after 1945, when the Second World War got over, the world became bipolar. On one hand, we had the United States of America as the superpower. On the other hand, we had USSR, Soviet Union, Soviet Russia as another superpower. China was the weakest link in this triangle. So when China was the weakest link, because the condition of China today is not what it was in 1949 onwards. China was looking at status and security. So I need China. China was looking at the entire world that we need some status for us and we need security from other world powers as well. And it is through this prism that China looked at its relations with India. How? China thought that India is also geographically very vast. So India and China, they are competing with each other for status as well as for security. So on one hand, China was trying to put pressure on India that you should remain non-aligned. That's what non-aligned movement, which was started by Pandit Nehru, that we will not align with either of the two superpowers of US or USSR, we will remain non-aligned. And China was trying to ensure that India stays non-aligned. India does not go closer to either the US or the USSR power bloc. And at the same time, China was trying to needle India. China was trying to put pressure on India. China was trying to have some sort of dialogue with India so that we can have Asian solidarity. And what is this Asian solidarity? That Asia belongs to Asians. These United States, they have no place in India. They have no place in Asia. We want to keep these superpowers away from Asia. So let's build a strong Asian solidarity and keep these two world powers away from Asia. It was in this backdrop that in 1949 to 1962, the China's policy vis-a-vis India was, number one, to ensure that India remains non-aligned, and let's develop some sort of Asian solidarity with India so that United States and Russia, they do not attack China, do not lower the status and threaten the security of China. But then came 1962 war, where although it appeared before that China and India are close to each other, they are friends of each other, Hindi Chini bye bye, the slogan which was raised by the political class at that time, it quickly became known that China is expansionist. It wants to expand its territory because it wants security and it wants status as the Asian giant, which is China. But then in 1962 and 1989, India moved closer to USSR. You would recall that in 1971, when there was war between India and Pakistan, which ultimately led to the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent entity, at one point, United States 6th Fleet crossed closer to Bay of Bengal to support Pakistani army. And it was at this time that USSR also sent its fleet to support India. So India now realized that we have to seek the help of the Russians as well, because Pakistan and United States, they are coming closer to each other. So prior to that, China was looking at India from the prism, from this triangle of China, USSR and Russia. And China was ensuring that India remains non-aligned. And at the same time, let's build some Asian solidarity to keep these world powers away from Asia. But now when India is moving closer to USSR in the second phase, and it was in this phase that the relationship between USSR and China also deteriorated, China moved closer to Pakistan. And now China and Pakistan, they are all weather friends. They are as if they are permanent friends of each other. So China tried to establish close military ties, close friendship with Pakistan because it needed status and security. Because India and USSR, they are coming closer to each other. And it was in 1991 onwards when USSR got dismembered, when USSR split into multiple territories and Russia emerged. Now Russia and China started having good relations with each other. It was in this backdrop that China realized that the option which is there with United States, where United States is now our principal enemy, and United States is trying to engineer regime change in China. Because if you look at after 1945, after the end of the Second World War, the entire foreign policy of United States was focused on how do we prevent the emergence of communism in the newly independent Asian and African countries. When after the Second World War, when colonialism ended in most of Asia and Africa, when majority of the countries in Asia and Africa, which were under the colonial occupation, which now emerged as independent countries, the entire foreign policy of United States was focused on how do we prevent communism from emerging in these newly independent Asian and African countries. And 1991 onwards, it became clear to China that United States is trying to ensure a regime change in China so that communism ends in China. And this is what led to friction between India and China as well. And it is in this backdrop that we realize that in 2013, when Xi Jinping became the president of the People's Republic of China, and now he is into his third term as the head of the Chinese Communist state. Now he is expanding his territory. Now we are seeing some disputes in the South China Sea because China, the world has accepted now, is expansionist. In 2020, when the Galwan clashes broke out between India and China in the Ladakh area, whether it is Pangong Lake, whether it is Galwan, whether it is Hot Springs, whether it is Daulat Beg, Oldie, these areas where the clashes emerged, the difference in 2020 was, listen to me carefully, that the world was siding with India. Why the world was siding with India? Because now the world realized that China is expansionist in its ideology. China wants to expand its territory because of its various initiatives, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, such as Maritime Silk Road, such as the String of Pearls, where China is investing heavily in our neighborhood, whether it is Myanmar, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is the Gwadar port in Karachi, whether it is establishing a naval base at Djibouti. China is fast trying to encircle India because China is expansionist, and the world has realized this. And that is why we saw some terrific support for India in the aftermath of these Galwan clashes, when United States and other world powers spoke in favor of India. Now, according to this column, India is not today what it was in 1962. Now, India is also establishing, patrolling the areas along the line of actual control, investing heavily in constructing some projects along the line of actual control. So India and China are now matching each other. And that is what this column talks about. India is not the same as it was in 1962. And this time the world is also on our side. And this is reflective in getting Quad institutionalized, where some top countries, for example, the United States, for example, the Japan, for example, South Korea, for example, Australia, for example, other world countries, they are now coming closer to India to establish some sort of close mechanism to deal with expansionist China. That is the key thing that you should know regarding this column, India-China, between pre-1962 and now, and also the beautiful article or the research paper written by former Foreign Secretary Mr. Vijay Gokhale. Any questions as of now? Okay, great. Let's look at another newspaper article on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu. Thousands visit Bhima Koregaon War Memorial. For this, we need to understand what is this Battle of Koregaon, which was fought on the 1st of January 1818 between the soldiers of East India Company and the Peshwas. Now, one thing that you should remember is that there was no conclusive victor or a loser in this battle. This battle of Koregaon was neither won by the East India Company nor won by the Peshwas. But this battle of Koregaon was one of the battle in the Third Anglo-Maratha War. And since this Third Anglo-Maratha War was won by the British East India Company, it led to the failure, the defeat of the Marathas, and ultimately their territories were controlled by the East India Company. That is why we say, although this battle of Koregaon, there was no winner, there was no loser. But since this battle of Koregaon was part of the larger Third Anglo-Maratha War, and it is this larger Third Anglo-Maratha War which was won by the East India Company, that is why we say the Battle of Koregaon eventually was won by the British East India Company. But the soldiers of East India Company there were some Jews, there were some Rajputs, there were some Muslims, but predominantly they were Mahars. Mahars who were considered to be part of the lower caste or so-called lower caste. And these Mahars were pitted against Peshwas. Peshwas were the Brahmins. So according to some analysts, these Peshwas or these Brahmins, they had subjugated the Mahars, so-called lower caste community. And then in 1927, some newspapers write 1928. Some newspapers write 1927. Some books mention 27, some books mention 28. But whatever it is, either 27 or 28, this is when Dr. B.R. Ambedkar visited this victory pillar, Ran Stambh, the victory pillar which was established, which was erected to mark the victory of Mahars over the Peshwas. And since 1927-28, this victory pillar, which is the victory pillar of the Mahars' heroic or heroicism over the Peshwas, it was considered to be one of the defining moments of Dalit assertion. And every year, on the 1st of January, there is a congregation, there is a ceremony which marks the victory of Mahars over the Brahmins, or the so-called lower caste over the so-called upper castes. But something happened in 2018. There were violent clashes which led to the killing of one 27-year-old man. It led to injuries to 5 other people. There was large-scale violence when to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Koregaon. Because now Battle of Koregaon, or this victory stambh, or this victory pillar, is viewed as the Dalit assertion. This led to a clash. Some people were, one person was killed, some people were injured, and ultimately there was an investigation. And in this investigation, it was realized that these protests or this violence was sponsored, was orchestrated and organized by some people. And that is how some people were arrested. For example, Gautam Navlakha, Miss Sudha Bhardwaj, people such as Rona Wilson, Jesuit priest Stan Swami, poet from Andhra Varvara Rao. These people were arrested in this larger Bhima Koregaon violence conspiracy. But what you need to understand from the prelims perspective is that this Battle of Koregaon, which was fought on 1st of January 1818, there was no conclusive victor, there was no conclusive loser. But since this Battle of Koregaon was part of the larger Third Anglo-Maratha War, which led to the defeat of the Marathas and ultimately ended the Maratha control and gave this control to East India Company, we say Battle of Koregaon ultimately led to the victory of the British East India Company. And in 1927-28, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar visited this victory pillar, and since then, it is making a rallying point and some sort of an assertion of pride of Mahars, so-called lower castes, their victory over the so-called upper castes, who are these Peshwa Brahmins. Clear? Let's look at another topic on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu. India asks Pakistan to free prisoners, says ready to solve humanitarian matters. There are two things here, and listen to me carefully. These two can be very important for your prelims examination. One is the prohibition of attack against nuclear installations and facilities. What is this? This was an agreement reached between India and Pakistan in 1998. Benazir Bhutto was the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Shri Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. And this agreement was ratified in the year 1991. According to this agreement, what happens? Every year on the 1st of January, something is exchanged. Some details are exchanged between India and Pakistan. What are these details? Details about nuclear installations. For example, India will share details, the list of its nuclear installations, nuclear power plants, for example. Pakistan will also share its list of nuclear installations with India every year, according to this agreement, on the 1st of January. Now, what is the impact of this agreement? If tomorrow there is a war between India and Pakistan, both countries have agreed, according to this agreement, that we will not attack each other's nuclear installations. So in case tomorrow there is a war between the two countries, they have already shared a list of nuclear installations. Both countries have resolved that we will not attack each other's nuclear installations. Because tomorrow you cannot claim, I was not knowing that this is a nuclear installation, that is why I dropped a bomb on it. No, because we have already shared the list with each other. But even if, for example, Pakistan attacks one of these nuclear installations, the details of which we have shared with them already on the 1st of January, it will be considered as a first strike. It will be considered as if it's a first nuclear strike by Pakistan on India. And then, according to no first use policy, which is our nuclear doctrine, we will not use nuclear weapons for the first time, but we will use it if we are attacked. No first use policy is our nuclear doctrine, but we will not use nuclear weapons for the first time. But if we are attacked, we will give a credible answer to that nuclear attack. So even if it's a normal bomb attack or a missile attack on any of these nuclear installations, we can safely assume that it was a nuclear attack on India, and we will have every right to mount a credible offense against Pakistan. Because any attack by Pakistan on these nuclear installations, the list of which we have shared with them on 1st of January every year, it will be considered as a first strike, and then we will have the right to retaliate. That's point number 1 that you have to look at from this newspaper article. Point number 2, there is something called Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. (1963). What is this Vienna Convention on Consular Relations? For example, there are Indians in Germany. For example, in Germany there are Indians. If these Indians are arrested, they have to right to access the embassy of India in Germany. They have to right to approach the embassy of India in Germany, or the Indian officers in Germany who are posted in the embassy, they have the right to approach these prisoners who have been taken in Germany and to give them some sort of a legal defense. This is the right. An additional protocol of this Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, it was ratified by Pakistan in the year 1976, It was ratified by India in 1977. According to this additional protocol, any dispute on the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, the International Court of Justice will have the jurisdiction. That means if there is any dispute between the two countries regarding Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, the matter will be heard by the International Court of Justice. And this was what was resorted to in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. Kulbhushan Jadhav, who is considered as a spy by Pakistan, we say he was not a spy, a normal citizen who was arrested in Iran in the Chabar port area by Pakistan and wrongly implicated by Pakistan under spying charges. And he was almost said to be hanged by Pakistan. But then we approached International Court of Justice. Pakistan said, International Court of Justice will not have any jurisdiction in this case. But we argued. We approached the International Court of Justice and said, since Pakistan has ratified this additional protocol in 1976, we have also ratified in 1977, which means any dispute when it comes to Vienna Convention on Consular Relations will have the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Because we were asking Pakistan, give us access to Kulbhushan Jadhav. Give the Indian embassy in Pakistan, in Islamabad, access to Kulbhushan Jadhav. But they were not given, which primarily means violation of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. And ultimately, ICJ ruled in our favor and we got access, the consular access to Kulbhushan Jadhav. But also what happens? Every year, India and Pakistan share the prisoners, the details of the prisoners. How many Indian prisoners are there in Pakistani jails? How many Pakistani prisoners are there in Indian jails? These details are also shared with each other every year. And now, according to newspaper article on page number 1, India has asked Pakistan to free prisoners, says ready to solve these humanitarian matters because there are some fishermen who inadvertently, when they are on a fishing expedition, inadvertently they cross the Pakistani side and they're arrested. They're not spies, they're not military personnel, they are just innocent fishermen who have crossed the Pakistani waters. On humanitarian grounds, India is asking Pakistan to release these prisoners. Because according to this convention, we also share the details of the prisoners who are in each other's prisons. That is all that you need to know regarding this newspaper article on page number 1. Now let's come to the last part. Delimitation can provide safeguards in Assam that NRC could not, according to the Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma. Let's look at this newspaper article in slight detail. What is delimitation? Delimitation is basically a redrawal of electoral boundaries, or should we say the territorial boundaries or constituencies. What does that mean? For example, 1 lakh people in UP are represented by 1 MP in Lok Sabha. For example, it should not mean that 10,000 people in Sikkim are represented by 1 Lok Sabha MP. Then 1 person, 1 vote. This principle is violated. For example, inflation. What do we mean by inflation? Rise in the prices of essential commodities together with the fall in the value of rupee. For example, if tomato yesterday cost 20 rupees per kg, today it is 200 rupees per kg, which means 200 rupees previously would have given us 10 kgs of tomatoes, and today it's giving us only 1 kg of tomato, which means there is a fall in the value of rupee. In the same case, 10,000 people in Sikkim are represented by 1 Lok Sabha MP, but 1 lakh people in UP are represented by 1 Lok Sabha MP, which means the value of vote of a person in Sikkim is more than the value of vote of a person, of a citizen in Uttar Pradesh. That means 1 person, 1 vote is violated. This cannot happen. That is why Constitution says after every census, there should be delimitation. That means after every census, when we get to know what is the population of India, as soon as the population increases, corresponding to that, there should be increase in the number of seats in Legislative Assembly in Lok Sabha. And we did implement, for example, after the census of 1951, in 1952, delimitation exercise was carried out. After the census of 1961, in 1963, delimitation exercise was carried out. After the census of 1971, in 1973, delimitation exercise was carried out, which means after every census, when we realize that the population is increased, corresponding to the increase in the population, there should be increase in the number of seats as well. That's how the Lok Sabha constituencies, for example, increased from 489 to 513, then to 543. But then in 1973, after the delimitation exercise of 1973, southern states protested. They said, you are basically disincentivizing us. Srimati Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister then, Indira Gandhi, she asked how? She said she was told that the southern states, they have implemented family planning programs effectively. But the northern states, for example Bihar, for example Uttar Pradesh, for example Rajasthan, for example Madhya Pradesh, they have not implemented family planning programs effectively, which basically means that their population continuously keeps on rising. As the rise in population, corresponding to that, there is rise in the number of seats in Lok Sabha. Southern states protested and said, this is a disadvantage to us. If this continues, then we will reach a point where the southern states will have less representation in Lok Sabha and northern states will have high representation in Lok Sabha. That's how in 1976, 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act was passed, delimitation was stopped. Till 2002, there will be no delimitation. Even if there is delimitation after 2002, there won't be an increase in the number of seats till 2026. What am I trying to say? Since southern states feared that they will be at a disadvantage because they have effectively implemented family planning programs, and the northern states will be at an advantage because their population is rising, their seats in Lok Sabha will also keep on rising. Then the constitution was amended, because constitution said after every census there should be delimitation. Now the constitution says no further delimitation till 2002. Even if after 2002 delimitation will be implemented, but it won't lead to an increase in the number of seats till 2026. Till 2026, no seats will be increased, whether it is Legislative Assembly of the states or whether it is the Lok Sabha. Seats will not increase. Then in 2002, delimitation exercise was carried out. Although it won't lead to an increase in the number of seats, but delimitation was carried out. And the final award was given in the year 2008. And this delimitation is conducted by a statutory body known as the Delimitation Commission. Now you might be wondering, sir, if the number of seats will not increase, then what is the idea? What is the purpose? What is the agenda of carrying out delimitation? Two purposes. That's why in 2002, delimitation was carried out based on the census of 2001. Why was delimitation carried out? Although it did not lead to an increase in seats, neither to Lok Sabha nor to legislative assemblies, then what was the purpose of conducting delimitation? Two purposes. One, internal reorganization, and number two, SC/ST reservation. Listen to me carefully. When delimitation was carried out in the year 2002 by the Delimitation Commission, which the process, it took 6 years, and final award was given in 2008. And whatever award is given by Delimitation Commission cannot be challenged in any court of law. That means delimitation award, that these many constituencies will be created, this will be the shape of the constituency, this will be the area under the constituency. These decisions cannot be challenged in any court of law. That's what the Constitution says under Article 329. But then why was the delimitation carried out? Although the number of seats will remain 543 in Lok Sabha, but we will conduct delimitation so that the number of seats reserved for SCs and STs will go up. Total seats will not increase, but the seats reserved for SCs and STs will increase. Which means since 1973, when the last delimitation was carried out, till the year 2002, there has been a significant increase in the population of SC and ST community. To respond to the situation, the number of seats reserved for them should increase. Total seats will remain fixed, 543 for example. Total seats will not increase, but the seats reserved for SCs and STs will go up. That was purpose 1 of delimitation when it was carried out in the year 2002. Purpose 2 was internal reorganization. And what is this internal reorganization? For example, this is a state which has, for example, 4 constituencies. Here there are 1 million people, here there are 10 million people, here there are 11 million people, here let's say there are 8 million people. 1 million people represented by 1 legislator, 10 million people represented by 1 legislator, 11 million people, 8 million people represented by 1 legislator, which means 1 person, 1 vote is violated. Which means the voter in this constituency has more value to his vote than the voter in this constituency. It was for this purpose that delimitation was carried out in the year 2002. What was this delimitation? Let's take a look at the entire population and divide the entire state in such a manner that although it will not lead to increase in the seats, but at least 1 person, 1 vote will be followed, which basically means 11 million, 22 million, 30 million. For example, let's have these 30 million divided into 4 constituencies, so that in every constituency we will have, for example, 7.5 million voters represented by 1 MP. 7.5 million represented by 1 MP. So that 1 person, 1 vote is followed. It is for these 2 reasons that delimitation exercise was carried out in the year 2002. But some states, this delimitation was not carried out. One state was Jammu and Kashmir, because it had a special status under Article 370 of the Constitution. But in 2019, when the special status was revoked, for Jammu and Kashmir, a delimitation commission was set up. And for Jammu and Kashmir alone, delimitation also will happen, and it will lead to an increase in seats as well. That was for J&K. And the same delimitation commission had to conduct delimitation exercise for 4 other northeast states as well. Which are these states? Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, and Nagaland. Why? Because in 2002, when delimitation was carried out in the rest of the country, it was not carried out in Jammu and Kashmir because of its special status. It was not carried out in Assam, Arunachal, Manipur and Nagaland as well. Why? Because these states protested. These states protested. In fact, there was a petition filed in the Guwahati High Court as well. They challenged that 2001 census should not be the basis of delimitation in these 4 states. Because these 4 states, we have had the history of illegal migration as well. So 2001 census should not be the basis of delimitation. And ultimately, President of India accepted this, although High Court did not give any order, but the President took the political opinion from these 4 states and said, okay, in these 4 states, delimitation will not be carried out. But when delimitation will be carried out, at that time, delimitation will be carried out by not the Delimitation Commission, but the Election Commission of India. Listen to me carefully. in these 4 states, delimitation in the year 2002 was not conducted because these states protested. They approached the government asked the president, please issue an order and say delimitation will be conducted in the entire country but not in these 4 states. President said okay, and president was also told that next time when delimitation is to be conducted there, when the situation is better to conduct delimitation in these 4 states, let's not establish another delimitation commission to conduct delimitation in these 4 states. Let's give this power, give this responsibility of carrying out delimitation to the Election Commission of India. But after the special status of J&K was revoked, when delimitation commission was set up, this delimitation commission was given the authority to conduct delimitation exercise in J&K and these 4 states as well. Then one of the legal advisors to Election Commission of India, he wrote in the Indian Express. He said this is unconstitutional. Why? Because 2002 order given by the President of India empowers Election Commission of India and not the Delimitation Commission to conduct delimitation exercise in these 4 states. So Election Commission has the authority, not the Delimitation Commission, to conduct delimitation exercise in these 4 states. That is why the central government accepted this, and Delimitation Commission, which was set up for Jammu and Kashmir, headed by former Supreme Court Judge Justice Ranjana Desai, she conducted, or the Delimitation Commission conducted delimitation exercise only for J&K. And now the Election Commission of India is going to conduct delimitation exercise in these states. And that is what Assam Chief Minister is also saying. Election Commission of India has asked these states that from 1st of January 2023, don't make any changes to your districts. And that is how, just before 1st of January 2023, the Assam government has issued an order basically merging 4 districts, or 4 districts which were created, they were quelled, they were dissolved. The 4 new districts which were created, they were dissolved. And Assam Chief Minister says population alone should not be the criteria for conducting delimitation exercise. How this delimitation exercise will be conducted, what are the political implications of this, we will have to wait and watch. That we will discuss as soon as the new current affairs developments take place. That was about it. We have 2 questions for your mains examination so that you can practice for your mains examination. Question number 1, write the answer in 150 words. The Election Commission's decision to enable migrant workers to vote remotely is going to be historic in making India a more inclusive, participatory and a vibrant democracy. Comment. Question number 2, China's India policy has been shaped by its view of the larger great power strategic triangle of China, the Soviet Union, later Russia, and the United States. Discuss, write these answers in 250 words and 150 words, submit to us, and we will evaluate. That's about it in today's The Hindu newspaper analysis. If you have liked this session, press the like button. Do drop in your comments. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. And see you again tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning, with another session of the Hindu newspaper analysis. But if there are some questions, please let me know. I will go through these questions one by one. Thank you, Pooja. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Khushbu, Pranshu. Vaibhav, Pramila, no questions. Sir, is it right increasing population with number increase? Population is not the only criteria in carrying out delimitation. For example, in case of Jammu and Kashmir, population alone was not the factor. Remote areas with difficult terrain was another factor. The inaccessibility of some areas during the peak winter session or the winter season, that was another criteria. The border areas, giving them good representation. That was another criteria. Population alone is not the criteria in delimitation, although population is an important factor in carrying out delimitation. How many seats in Lok Sabha as Anglo-Indians are removed? 545 used to be the number. Now 2 Anglo-Indians, their reservation has been stopped. So the existing strength of Lok Sabha is 543. That's about it. Thank you so much for being with us. Stay safe and see you again tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. Have a great time. Bye-bye. All the best.